Hello my fiery friends, the Infernoman here with the hottest in budget deck technology. And for today's deck tech, first off I simply want to say happy Turkey Day for all of you that do celebrate out there, but even if you don't, we have a super sweet and awesome special edition video for you to share. So without further ado, join me today as we jump into the Explorer format for a mini deck tech based on the holiday that I am simply calling Fancy Feast.
Thanksgiving, it's like we didn't even try to come up with a tradition. The tradition is we overeat.
Hey, how about at Thanksgiving we just eat a lot?
We do that every day.
But before we continue, if you do like any of the content that I do, please like, follow, and subscribe wherever you watch the content. You can support me monthly for a small amount on Patreon, where I have all of my extended bonus footage posted. We also have a Redbubble spot where you can buy merch like stickers and shirts, or for free, all you can just do also is just join our growing community on Discord. Your support helps keep this channel going. All links are in the details below. Longtime viewers of the channel know how we do it. We have to talk about the stats of the deck before we dive right in. So our Turkey Day deck is based upon Golgari colors of black and green. You're looking at an average mana curve of about 1.9. We have 12 creatures, 8 instants, 4 sorceries, 4 artifacts, 10 enchantments, and 22 lands. Fancy Feast's focus is mostly on the food sub-package in a Golgari themed deck. All we're simply trying to do is gain a ton of value by consuming all the food that we make, whether of course we sacrifice it ourselves, or we convert our opponent's creatures into food too. Even if they do try to eat the food, we will take advantage of it on our end by going wide, going big, or we may even be able to mill out our opponent with our game plan. But you may be wondering, Infernoman, how did you manage to pull off this and keep it flavorful for the holiday? No, I'm really serious. Not only did I make this deck highly synergistic, but it is also on flavor because there are several cards in the deck that work great together, and also they're going to be kind of representative of the holiday itself, which I'll explain by kind of mixing it up differently than I usually do for deck techs. So let's begin with the 1-drop slot. We're kicking it off with Cauldron's Familiar here. I'm sure I don't have to explain this combo here, but again, sacrifice the cat to the Witch's Oven down here. The Witch's Oven can then sacrifice the food to bring the cat back. This will life gain and drain out our opponent, so this is great on its own. But also this represents the holiday because many of you out there have a pet that you probably like to take care of, and of course the oven is, well, basically where you're going to put your food as you begin cooking up stuff for the holiday itself. Speaking of the holiday, in the 1-drop slot we will also have copies of Duress here. This will of course discard an opponent's non-creature non-land card from their hand, but also realistically this card represents the fact that some of you out there do not look forward to meeting certain individuals in your family.
What if we eat a lot with people that annoy the hell out of us?
Fatal Push here because every so often there are accidents that happen on the day. You can destroy a target creature with a mana value of 2 or less, and if you do Revolt, this will allow you to destroy a creature with mana value of 4 or less. However, all I'm just going to simply say is just be careful out there, whatever you're doing, whether you're climbing your roof to put on Christmas lights, or maybe you're doing something else for the holiday, just be mindful out there because there's a lot of accidents that happen this time of year. Scavenger's Talent here in the 1-drop slot is also a really awesome card here, so we're actually going to talk about this card for just a moment. So Scavenger's Talent is an enchantment class that reads, for its first ability, whenever one or more creatures you control dies, you create a food token. This triggers only off once each turn. At level 2 for 2 mana, whenever you sacrifice a permanent, target player mills 2 cards. Some of you out there are going to throw away some of your food and leftovers because, let's be honest, nobody wants to eat turkey for more than a couple days. But at level 3 for 3 mana, at the beginning of your end step, you may sacrifice 3 other non-land permanents. So if you do, you get to return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield with a finality counter on it. So this is great value for us, and you can see how it's very flavorful for the holiday itself. Going into the 2-drop slot here, we have Deadly Dispute here. You sacrifice an artifact or a creature to draw 2 cards and create a treasure token. But let's be honest, some of you out there may have very hotly debated disputes with some of your family members. So again, be mindful, please be kind to each other, and just be careful out there with what you may say to one another. Trail of Crumbs here, of course, is an enchantment where it enters, you can create a food token. Whenever you sacrifice a food, you can pay 1, and then you can look at the top 2 cards of your library. You can reveal one of the permanent cards you chose, and the other one gets to put on the bottom of your library in whatever order you want. And then finally, rounding out the 2-drop slot, we'll have Welcome to Sweet Tooth here. I absolutely love holiday desserts this time of year. I'm actually kind of partial myself to pumpkin pie, so that's kind of a little info FYI for you guys out there. But otherwise, going back to the enchantment saga here, on the one part, you get to create a 1/1 white human creature token. Second part, create a food token. And third part here, put X amount of 1/1 counters on target creature you control. Well, X is the 1 plus the number of food you control. So this will make one of your creatures super big and super strong to just power through anything your opponent may try to block with it. Now, in the 3-drop slot here, we have Woe Strider here. So this horror allows you to then create a goat token, which you can sacrifice later on for free. And of course, this is our great sack outlet to help us kind of filter through our deck by scrying 1 with each creature we sacrifice. However, if it does get blown up, you can of course use the escape mechanic for 5 mana to exile 4 cards out of your graveyard and then bring it back with also an additional +2 1/1 counters on it. And one of our other creatures here that's going to help us go wide and kind of represent the fact that you really may have a big family that does gather at this time of year, we have Camilla the Seed Miser. Let's talk about this card for just a moment as well. So Camilla the Seed Miser here is a 3-mana 3/3 Squirrel Warlock. It's a legendary creature that has Menace. And also it says, other squirrels you control have Menace. Whenever you sacrifice 1 or more foods, you create a 1/1 green squirrel creature token. And for 2, and you get to forage, you get a +1/+1 counter on each other squirrel we control. If you forgot what forage means, that just means that you exile 3 cards from your graveyard or you sacrifice a food. Either way, this is an incredibly powerful card that'll help us just build up a whole army of squirrels that can help us go wide against our opponent. However, if we can convert all those squirrels into food themselves, we'll be able to go even bigger and stronger. How do we convert everything to food, you may wonder? Well, the final card in our deck and the star of the show is actually going to be Ygra, Eater of All. I haven't had a chance to play with this card too much until recently, and I absolutely love what this card can do. So we have to talk about this card for just a moment. So it says, Ygra, Eater of All, is a 5-mana 6/6 legendary creature. It's an elemental cat with ward where it's protected unless your opponent sacrifices a food. Other creatures are food artifacts in addition to their other types, so they will gain the permanent effects of a food as long as Ygra is out, which means that you pay 2 and sacrifice the permanent to gain 3 life. Whenever a food is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, put 2 +1/+1 counters on Ygra. So woo! This card is extremely powerful and very hard to get rid of if your opponent does not actually have creatures on a battlefield to convert into food. At the same time, if they do try to convert any of that food, they most likely will power up Ygra and they'll just get bigger and bigger and it'll be too much for your opponent to handle, and that means our kitty cat here will be a very easy way to help close out the game against your opponents. This is still going to be a budget deck, even if it is a holiday episode, so we're going to keep this as simple as can be. So we have 7 swamps, we have 4 forests, we're going to utilize a copy of Gingerbread Cabin here and Witch's Cottage, just to give us a little extra value if they do trigger off. With Witch's Cottage, it brings back one of our creatures from our graveyard to the top of our library, and Gingerbread Cabin, if it triggers off, will just give us an extra free food token. We'll have some tap lands with Haunted Mire here, we'll have a single copy of Restless Cottage, because this will be our only main creature land that can also convert itself into not only a big creature, but also would help us create some extra food, and also can be great graveyard hit in the main deck. And then finally, Riveters Overlook, an entire set of these, because this will also not only trigger off Scavenger's Talent once we get to its extra abilities, but also Fatal Push's Revolt ability to get the maximum amount of value out of our deck. Now, if you are interested in taking this into best of 3, here's what I'm going to recommend for you. You have Haywire Might here, which you can utilize to gain a little bit extra life when it does die. You can sacrifice it to exile a non-creature artifact or an enchantment, so this will be great for those kinds of decks. Since we do want to focus on sacrificing, we also have an additional option here in Pick Your Poison, which forces our opponent to sacrifice an artifact of their choice, an enchantment, or a creature with flying. We also will have Soul Guy Lantern here as our graveyard hate as always. Go Blank here is going to be not only graveyard exiling effects, but also will force our opponent to discard a couple cards. If we don't want to deal with life gain, we'll also bring in Knight of Dusk Shadow here, which turns that off, and also it can pump itself up in a pinch. We have Blot Out here again as additional ways to exile creatures or planeswalkers with the greatest mana value among them that they control, just to get rid of the big stuff. We also have Experimental Confectioner here just to help us again create some more food for us, and also every time we sacrifice food we can create some more rats, which will help us again go big. Once with Ygra gets out, this basically can become an infinite combo. It's actually quite hilarious if it does go off. And finally, if we want to go super wide and super big, we have Knight of Sweet's Revenge here, which converts all of our food into tokens that we can tap for mana, and then we can sacrifice them later on to make all of our creatures really, really strong. Now, as far as strategy that I can give you and tips that will help you get the most out of this deck is, one of the biggest advantages, this deck does not care about spot removal or wraths. And the reason for that is, as you see, Cauldron Familiar can sacrifice itself to the Witch's Oven to get more value. Or even if you don't have the Witch's Oven out, your other cards that can help you just get more food to then bring it back will be Scavenger's Talent itself. That card alone sometimes can help you win victories. Think of it this way, Witch's Oven and Scavenger's Talent kind of work in conjunction with the Cauldron Familiar to kind of keep those infinite loops going. So that's one combo on its own. The other combo that you have is actually built into the deck already, so you can infinitely go and beat out your opponent as long as you have an Ygra and at least 2 Cauldron Familiar out on the battlefield. By sacrificing 1 kitty cat, and then bringing it back, utilizing the other kitty cat as food, you can keep this combo going and then hopefully just drain out your opponent before they have any answers against you. Another infinite combo going back to that scavenger's talent allows you to mill out your opponent and then just hopefully just deck them out if, say, like life gain and drain doesn't work for you. Your other biggest advantages, of course, is the variety of different ways you can get to that victory. So as I just mentioned, not only does that combo work, but Ygra, of course, will keep getting bigger and bigger with all the +1/+1 counters you will stack on top of it to go super big and one-shot kill your opponent. If that doesn't work, however, you also have Camilla, who can then take advantage of the fact that you'll be sacrificing your cat to get more food, and this will create a giant squirrel army that you can utilize later on to, again, super wide against your opponent. Other ways you can pump up your team will be cards like Welcome to Sweet Tooth that are built into the main deck, or if you need to keep building up more value and drawing more cards, that's why you have Trail of Crumbs to then start digging out more cards as you sacrifice your food, or you have Deadly Dispute to sacrifice maybe a couple extra food to then draw some extra cards and create a treasure token. One thing that I do want to remind everyone is don't be afraid to sacrifice excess food if you need to, just to keep churning through your deck to get to your answers and get to your end game pieces that'll help you win. Some people get a little conservative. I've noticed when I've seen this deck played in different variants, they kind of get a little shy with food, but really you have to be good at managing your food resources to get the most value out of your deck. The other biggest advantage, of course, is as you're sacrificing those things, you can then to get max value out of your fatal pushes, of course, and your scavenger's talent. So mill as you accordingly. Either you may need to mill yourself on 1 or 2 turns, but more likely than not, you can mill out your opponent without any fear. The other big thing that I also want to remind everyone, of course, is if you have a turn 1 duress, make sure to turn 1 duress, even if you cannot discard a card. At least that gives you a little peek into what your opponent is planning with their strategy, so you can adjust accordingly as the game progresses. Having said all that, there is one major weakness to the deck, and you probably have maybe figured it out by now, but we are susceptible completely to graveyard hate. So if your opponent has a Rest in Peace, a Leyline of the Void, or anything else like Soul Guide Lanterns just to exile your graveyard, you're going to have a sad time with this deck, because your graveyard is one of the key pieces we need to keep looping our Cauldron Familiar, to keep bringing back our Woe Striders, or to utilize Scavenger Talons' third ability to keep bringing those creatures back to the graveyard, utilizing our extra food. And if we can't do that, our plan gets a little harder to do. Not to say that you couldn't get victory if you try other means and strategies, but you really do want to take advantage of your graveyard to get the max amount of value out of this deck. But as long as you can bring in your hate pieces, if you're playing in best of 3, if they bring in graveyard hate, you should have no problem getting to victory, because the main deck and its core already is designed to just adjust accordingly depending on whatever your opponent is going to throw at you. Now, if you do like the deck and maybe you want to try other different strategies and ways of then taking advantage of the food sub archetype, I will show you on screen right now a couple of extra Turkey Day decks that we've done in years past, and of course a couple other variants of food decks out there if you want to spend a little extra on rares and mythics. Those, of course, will be scattered throughout this video if you haven't already done so, so click on a couple of those if you're interested in seeing a little bit more of what this archetype is capable of. But with that all out of the way, here are my final thoughts that I want to give overall. This deck and the food archetype just continually keep getting stronger and stronger. I mean, it was already a pretty interesting archetype in the beginning when we first got them introduced in the original Eldraine set 5 years ago, but as you've seen, there are so many more variants of food now, more than ever, so there's tons of different ways you can go with this deck. You don't have to go super on flavor like I did, but if you do, you're still going to have a lot of fun with what we showed you today on screen. To put it another way, if you're a fan of the food mechanic, and if you're a fan of going super wide or going super big, or if you're a fan of the fact that this is perhaps one of the most diverse sub-archetypes that we have seen in Magic over the past couple of years, then I would definitely say, give this deck a try, and I assure you, whether you want to play this on Turkey Day or any other day, you're going to have a lot of fun doing so, and you'll be very surprised that you can pull this off on a budget, and I assure you, you will definitely not be disappointed. That's all I have for you today. Thanks again for watching, everyone, and just remember that no matter what you do play in the game of life, always be sure to burn bright. Later.